After season 1 of Made in Abyss, it would be a whole 2.5 years before there would be a continuation to the anime, in the form of a feature film. However, a year before that, they made an additional 2 movies, Journey's Dawn and Wandering Twilight. These are actually abridged versions of the entire first season, condensing the show into a more manageable 3.5 hours between the 2 films. They're not bad and act as a good way to catch up on the story more efficiently, but I wouldn't actually recommend them. While none of the key story details are left out, there are certain scenes that I feel help with the background details and character development, which are ignored here. Episode 9 is practically left out entirely, and more importantly, the pacing feels way off. I definitely have an even greater appreciation for how that first season was edited. Like I said in the previous review, there's very little in the way of filler and it moves along at a brisk pace. With these 2 movies, that brisk pace is put into fast forward, and it kind of de-emphasizes the struggles that the characters go through. The only real significance that's added here is a prologue that's not even 4 minutes long. Like, it's a really cool scene, but it's not worth everything else that's missing. The real benefit that these 2 movies have is as a more convenient digest for the story, and if this is the only way you have to watch it, then so be it, but I highly recommend the original show instead. It goes on for much longer, and there's more recaps, which is annoying, but it is worth it. Also, might be slightly worth mentioning, but I took the opportunity to watch the movies in their original Japanese. It's good, but in my opinion, the English voice cast far trumps it, and it's my personal recommendation to watch the show in English. Either way is fine though. A year after these 2 movies were released, we finally have Dawn of the Deep Soul, the long-awaited sequel to Made in Abyss. The story picks up right where season 1 ended. Riko and Reg have teamed up with Nanachi to venture into the 5th layer, the Sea of Corpses, where they'll need to pass through Bondrew's laboratory and confront Nanachi's past. On the way, they befriend Bondrew's daughter, Prushka, and learn more details on his experiments. Our trio of explorers have to team up and come up with a plan to defeat Bondrew in order to continue delving deeper into the abyss. After how messed up season 1 can get, you might figure that you're reasonably prepared for what the sequel has in store. But this story pulls no punches and keeps looking for new ways to disturb you further. I'll avoid showing any of it and try to keep this spoiler-free, but the blood, gore, and generally uncomfortable situations are taken even further here, especially with the torture and dismemberment scenes. I hate to say just take my word for it, but trust me, it ain't pretty. The writing and character interactions are just as good. Nanachi participates well in this movie and doesn't come off like a third wheel at all. In fact, much of the movie focuses on her as kind of the protagonist, but Riko and Reg have their moments too. Especially Reg, but I'll get around to that more later. As before, there's plenty of light humor, emotional moments, disturbing imagery, and everything in between. The writing is still just as good. Of course, they have to bring up Reg's penis again. I guess the whole series can't go for an hour without mentioning it.
It usually looks kinda like this, but whenever Reg sees boobs or touches Nanachi, it sorta changes.
Oh, that looks like the thingy Papa has.
I'm sorry, what? Is this movie for real? What am I even watching anymore? Well, speaking of Papa's thingy, Bondrew is a great villain. He kinda reminds me of Albert Wesker from Resident Evil. Powerful, intelligent, arrogant, and seemingly unbeatable. Unlike Wesker, however, Bondrew doesn't go to the level of a Saturday morning cartoon villain. He's much more threatening with his calm and controlled mannerisms, and it seems like there's nothing that can be done to stop him, which applies doubly so considering all the main characters are little kids. His attitude and general approach is the kind of evil that believes the ends justify the means, although Unlike Ozen, who ultimately takes action out of a tough love and brutal support for Riko and Reg, as well as to uphold the promise to Liza, Bondru does so in hopes that his research will lead to the betterment of mankind and science, no matter who he hurts along the way. Like I said, he's basically Wesker. Prushka is the other new character this movie focuses on, although she doesn't get a ton of screen time. Still, she feels unique to the Made in Abyss world. She's the first character in this show who essentially acts like a secluded princess, unaware of Bondru's evil or of much of the outside world, and an interesting dynamic forms with that as the plot progresses. I would have liked to see this develop a little further, but what is there is neat and well done. In terms of the visuals, the movie is definitely a step up from the show, which already look good. Once again, great colors, lighting, shadows, and animation. It's more of the same for the most part, just better. There are, however, these 3D graphics and other weird special effects that are occasionally used. It's rare, but it stands out so much. At least it's not awful, but man, I wish it wasn't like this. Or at least done better. Something that I have to bring up is the action. This is a pretty big spoiler due to how surprising it is for Made in Abyss to go in this direction, but it's such a big deal that I couldn't let it go unmentioned. While Season 1 had its anime fights for sure, the movie tries to take it to the level of Dragon Ball Z. It's extremely absurd, but also pretty exhilarating and really cool. The battles are well choreographed, well animated, and it's engaging to watch them play out. Not to mention that we get to see Reg really cut loose. Going through the credits, I can spot Production IG and Studio Trigger. And while I'm not exactly sure what it's referring to, I wouldn't be surprised if they helped out with the battle animation. And that's about everything I have to say. The main takeaway is that this is just more of the same for Made in Abyss. In fact, this basically acts as the final episode of Season 1. I complained about how the first season ends rather abruptly, but if this was their plan all along, for a higher quality movie to act as the ending, then I'd say this is probably the right way to go about it. I don't really know how I feel about the fights being so over the top. Like, it's cool, but it also seems a little off-tone considering how the previous episodes at least pretended to be somewhat down-to-earth. What's more important though, is that Dawn of the Deep Soul is a proper send-off for Made in Abyss. All the strengths of the show are here and cranked up further. It's just as depressing and exciting as always. And I'd say even more disturbing and uncomfortable. But it is a really good story with great characters in a fascinating world. A lot of mysteries remain unsolved, and the movie appropriately ends with a to be continued. But this definitely feels like a satisfying end to Season 1. Thanks for watching my review on Made in Abyss: Dawn of the Deep Soul.